Welcome to our webinar, Cost-Effective and Simple Solutions to Prepare Local Governments and Institutions for Cyber Attacks. My name is Susan Tardif. I am the Senior Executive Assistant to the Director of the Marco Hatfield School of Government. This webinar is being recorded. Audience members are muted and your video has been disabled. If you have questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A box. We ask that the questions and chat be kept respectful. We start today with the land acknowledgement. The Hatfield School of Government is the academic home of the Institute of Tribal Government, which is working in ongoing partnership with our sovereign tribal nations. We know that our panelists and attendees today are participating from many different locations. I offer this land acknowledgement from Portland State University. What we now call Portland, Oregon and Multnomah County are the traditional lands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Cowlitz bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other family bands and tribes who made and continue to make their homes along the Columbia and Willamette River. Today, people from these bands have become part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, as well as the Chinook Nation and Cowlitz Nation in Washington State. It is important to acknowledge the ancestors of this place and to recognize that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In acknowledging these communities, we honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants. The Marco Hatfield Center for Cybersecurity is a collaborative partnership between computer sciences and engineering, public affairs and public policy, and business administration. Designated as a national center of academic excellence in cyber research by the National Security Agency and the Department of Homeland Security, the Marco Hatfield Center for Cybersecurity strives to make important contributions to regional and national efforts to further cybersecurity expertise and education in ways that complement and enhance national goals and investments. This webinar is sponsored and made available to our attendees free of charge, thanks to the support of Palo Alto Networks. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Margaret Banyan. Margaret is a senior fellow in Portland State University's Center for Public Service. She is a non-voting member of the Oregon Cybersecurity Advisory Council and was also the project manager of the Oregon Cybersecurity Center of Excellence Establishment Plan. Margaret?
Thank you and welcome everybody. We're so pleased to be able to have this webinar and share some of these great panelists with you today. So what I'm going to do is just read you their short bios. And then we're going to handle this webinar in a round robin because I don't want to take up too much time because you have such great panelists here that have a great depth of knowledge. So first we have Annalise Famiglietti, and she is the she can help with how we pronounce your last name, Annalise. She's the Deputy State Chief Information Security Officer, Enterprise Information Services, Cybersecurity Services at the state of Oregon, where she also previously served as the Interim Chief Information Security Officer. Previously, she was the Deputy Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer for the Oregon Employment Department. So welcome, Annalise. And then we also have here Wu-Chang Feng. Wu-Chang is a professor of computer science at Portland State University, where he works on building capture the flag games and code labs for teaching students, a range of topics including web application exploitation, cloud security, blockchain vulnerabilities, reverse engineering, fuzzing, and symbolic execution. He also works on security education outreach to high school students and teachers via camps and internships through Cyber PDX and Saturday Academy. So welcome, Wu-Chang. And then we also, our third panelist is Hunter Ely. Hunter serves as the state and local education field strategist for Palo Alto Networks. He served in operational, technical, and strategic roles within major universities, as well as health science centers, and has held positions within networking, infrastructure, and security organizations, including cyber forensics, sales engineering, and leadership positions. He also served as the Chief Information Security Officer at Tulane University, focusing on reducing risk, driving down TCO, and on building out a cross-functional security organization. So welcome, Hunter. And then we also have with us Ronald Buchanan. Ronald Buchanan is the Chief Information Security Officer for the St. Charles Health System in Bend, Oregon, and he previously served for the state of Washington as their Chief Information Security Officer and Director of the Office of Cybersecurity. So welcome, Ron, and thank you all panelists for joining. So today what we'll do is we have a series of questions for the panelists, and those questions will take roughly about 50 minutes. Please feel free as the panelists are addressing some of our introductory questions. Feel free to ask your own in the Q&A section. We really want this targeted towards your needs, so feel free again to ask questions, and I'll be reading those towards the end. And I just want to say, we really value the expertise of the panelists, and so that's why we're launching initially into questions in a round robin. So we'll go first. So our order today will be Annalise, Wu-Chang, Hunter, and then Ron. And your first question is, what do you think? We've got a variety of participants today. What do you think some of the most common cybersecurity concerns that local government and institutions face? In other words, what are the most common vulnerabilities and threats that agencies should be worried about today? So Annalise, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. For us, with the state, the two biggest issues that we're seeing right now, probably similar to everybody else, phishing, number one, and code that has vulnerabilities built into it, whether it's cross-site scripting or something else like that. Those are the two biggest vulnerabilities that are out there that are being exploited that have been very successful for the bad guys, to put it that way. So that's where I would say that those are the two biggest things. The other issue I think that there is out there, and it's not a vulnerability, but it's a lack of training and understanding and end users knowing what to do and what not to do, right? So there's a lot of little things that, and I'm sure that we'll talk about them as well, things that you can do to help secure systems, things like what we call multi-factor authentication and stuff like that. But if I was, and I have been for the last couple of years, trying to say these are the things I'm going to focus on, we're focusing on phishing, we're focusing on protecting public facing applications, and we're focusing on security training.
Yeah, I would second all of that. Some specifics under that umbrella, maybe ransomware, I guess, is a big one that people are concerned about. Business email compromise. So once you have phished some credentials, pretending to be either endpoint of a conversation to get whatever information out of the business that you need. Account hijacking is part of that, I guess. And then one interesting one, I think San Francisco ran into this, is insider threats. Disgruntled employees, that could be a vector that people are concerned about.
What about you, Hunter? What do you think?
Sorry about that. Of course, my dog starts barking as soon as it's my turn, as these things go. I would echo both what Annalise and Wu-Chang said. The thing about phishing in particular is that it's just this, email was designed to be simple and easy, and it's been easily exploitable for years and years and years. And we have yet to come up with a better way to send email that will work, across the entire world in a nice standardized way that isn't vulnerable to that. So of course, I think phishing will continue to be a huge concern. It's something that we're going to fight against forever. But Annalise hit on, really my top concern, which is security awareness. And it's really sort of understanding where you fit in the kill chain, if you will, if we're going to use that terminology, where you fit in the vulnerability life cycle. That's a huge concern. And then things like configuration management, patching, all of the stuff associated with just running an operation from a security perspective, those are still huge and continuing to be a problem. They contribute to all kinds of things like ransomware and various denial of service and things like that.
So Hunter, could you talk really briefly about what kill chain is and some of the terms that you used?
Sure, I would probably lean on the expert with Wu-Chang to really get the specific definitions down. But the kill chain is the idea that to take down a system, there are several steps that have to happen. You have to compromise the system, and to compromise the system, you have to get access to the system. So there are several ways to do that. You can use vulnerabilities and exploit those. You can use one of the easiest methods, which is to phish somebody internally and then just have them hand over the password. And once they do that, then you can continue along that path. And the kill chain is just the chain of events that it takes to take down a service or a server or whatever. But humans are still, unfortunately, the weakest link almost always in those kill chains.
Super, thank you. Ron.
So yeah, I would definitely second what everybody said and agree 100% that I think our staff, employees, humans are the weakest link, but I really hate to say that because it sounds so negative, because in many ways, our staff, our employees are our greatest strength also. They're the eyes on the front line. They're the folks that, if properly equipped, if properly trained, they're going to detect things for us. Because so much of the time, ransomware is detected by calls to the service desk. These are our employees calling the service desk. So they may be acting unintentionally, but if we can empower them, if we can train them, we can give them the tools, then they're going to be our greatest asset also. So definitely awareness, education, 100%, I agree. Something else I would say would be, well, I'm focusing on vulnerabilities because I think threats are things that are very hard to predict, and they're always coming at us from different directions. Where I see vulnerabilities as something that we're responsible for. We kind of own those, we can detect those. And so it's really on us to patch, to mitigate our vulnerabilities, and then also address the threats that are coming at us. So that's why I'm looking at a vulnerability perspective here of the human element, but also a general, perhaps, what's our direction as an organization, especially as local government, as a small, medium-sized business? What is our roadmap? What are our goals? Because again, if we keep a threat focus, then if you imagine lately, we're going to be hopping from ransomware to SolarWinds network management system to the next thing. But all along, there's a foundational amount of work that needs to be done. And so there are some very good tools, roadmaps that are out there that have already pre-made for us, no reinventing the wheel. And I think we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But to sum up, I would say the human element, and also just an agreed upon organizational strategy and goals, and organizational being leadership down to the executors being IT, cybersecurity, information security. Thank you.
So I want to pick back up on this and continue with Ron and kind of go in reverse order here, because I think it's a good lead into what you just talked about a little bit, Ron, which is in terms of, you talk a little bit about strategy and what the organization should be doing overall. So what would you, if you were to advise leadership and management of agencies and even small agencies that don't have a technical staff, to take one or two steps to make their organizations more secure? Kind of how would you approach that? What would you be thinking about?
Sure. So a couple things is, one, to simplify as much as possible, simplify the tools that you have and simplify the goals that you're trying to achieve. because we try to often take, eating the elephant in one bite kind of deal. We want to do too much, and we also want to address those shiny, loud things that are happening. Basically not being able to separate the urgent from the important. And so identifying what's important, and the way you do that with an organization typically is through a risk assessment. You figure out what is your business, and so what is your business, what are the imperatives for the business. You do a risk assessment to determine where are your gaps from a cybersecurity, information security perspective, since that's the lens we're talking about right now. But obviously risk assessments come in many flavors and cover many different areas in the organization. But once you do the risk assessment, you identify what your gaps are, what your risks are, then you have essentially your goals that you need to achieve. And so you take your roadmap, and hopefully it is maybe some pre-established framework that exists already, which again, I think we'll talk about down the road here, but you apply that roadmap to your organizational goals being informed by the results from that risk assessment. And the risk assessment should be updated periodically. But what that's going to do is make you focus on what's important for your organization versus trying to treat everything equally, which everybody in this audience knows we don't have the people, the money, or the time to do that. Sometimes you have to treat some things more importantly, give more attention to some things than others, understanding that you're either accepting the risk with the others, or you're going to compensate in some way or another, maybe outsource, whatever the case may be, that other piece of the organization. So risk assessments would be my two-word answer.
Great. And Hunter, what would be your response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, risk assessments are critical. The only thing I would add to that, because my answer is going to be around risk assessments as well. The only thing I would add to that is, in my previous roles, I was lucky enough to work in organizations that had a risk management office. And I was always looking at ways to partner with them because risk management could carry water for the cause, if you will. But I think the biggest piece to think about in all of this is that before you can do a risk assessment, you have to really sort of define the world. What are the things that I must protect? What are the services that are absolutely critical for our organization to run? And then you can look at the onion outside of that, right? But you really want to define what are those things that are most important to you, and then do a risk assessment based upon the various results of losing that service or losing that data and sort of the downstream effects of it. So that's the only thing I would add to risk assessment, is that you need to go through a prioritization process to really define those things that are important to you, and then your world has become a little smaller, because otherwise, I've seen this happen, particularly at a university where you have all kinds of services. You start to do a risk assessment, you look at the broad picture, next thing you know, you're thinking about email and camera controllers and door controllers and all the IoT stuff that the research side is doing. You can't get your head around that. So prioritization exercise is key. Thanks.
Wu-Chang, what are your thoughts?
So I'll just continue on with the framework since Hunter brought it up. Yeah, having a framework to reason about all the different ways you could get exploited, and then figure out the ones that are most likely for your adversary to go after, and then addressing those first. For us, it just seems from we're not in an industrial setting, but for us, it just seems like the user, like the initial access against a compromised account is typically where a large majority of these compromises start with compromised credentials. So we're really trying to train people and educate people on that end. So not necessarily the technical patching, like the back end technical stuff, we do have to address that, but I think there's some real urgency in getting the people protected, especially in the age of COVID, where everyone is running on disparate networks from home with all sorts of untrusted machines. You have to lock in sort of the user and make sure that particular identity is secure.
So when you say that, are you thinking kind of an employee, having multiple different locations that they may be working from? You're sort of focused in on that employee.
Yeah, and COVID really forced the hand of a lot of enterprises and industries where Before you had some, you had to be physically present in order to get some kind of credential or some kind of trust, but we've blown that all up, right? Nobody can go into their server rooms, and nobody can do that kind of, that stuff has to be done from remote. And so then you're really opening things up from the traditional way we used to do security. This has been a year of a crash course in perimeterless security, what they call it zero trust security, where you can't just rely on a location to do security anymore. And that's really made some kind of a sea change is happening right now in the way people are looking at security now. And we're right in the middle of it, and there's a lot of chaos. And when there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of opportunity for adversaries to get in there. And I think someone just mentioned SolarWind. There's opportunities for people to get in there. Yeah.
Annalise, what are you seeing from the state perspective relative to this conversation?
So I hate to repeat what everybody else says, right? But truly, you really do want to start with understanding what your risks are. I would link that with something called a business impact analysis, which really helps you understand and helps you prioritize, right? There's some data that you don't want to go out the door, and there's other data you don't really care about. What we're seeing is probably one of the unexpected, I think, I don't want to call it a threat, but it kind of is, and it's related to what we've gone through this year, is that things have changed so very quickly, right? Like Wu-Chang said, we're doing things very, very different. There's a very strong belief that the perimeter as we know it is basically dead, right? We're moving to zero trust. We don't trust you because of where you're physically sitting. We trust you because of your identity. And with all of this rapid change, people are tired and people don't understand, and people are more prone to make mistakes. It's human nature, right? We all do it. So I think that's something that people really need to think about is, how do we as an organization help ensure that we're just not making mistakes because of burnout, right? Oh, I'm so tired and I've had to do this and I've had to change that, and you rolled out X, Y, and Z, and we didn't have any choice, and what's the next thing, and it's easy to get caught up into the, oh my gosh, we have to do this, we have to do it right now. We talk a lot about, nobody likes this term but me, but I talk a lot about, let's just put a temporary, a stopgap solution. What can we put in place to help us while we take a little more time to figure out a more permanent solution? And I think in some cases that's what you have to do, right? But don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to fix every single vulnerability, every single possibility where you could be exploited. Number one, you can't. And really, it comes down to, we talk about it all the time. You want to talk about your risk, right? We talk about a risk assessment. What is your greatest area of risk? Let's focus on the highest risk where there could be the most damage, if you will, and let's go after those. And eventually you'll get down to a more secure. You're never going to be secure. You're never going to be 100% secure. As I said to someone years ago who said, Annalise, I want you to tell us that we're secure and that nobody's ever going to breach us. And I said, the day I tell you that, you need to call my boss and fire me, because we're never going to be 100% secure. It's not possible. Don't shoot for that, but do understand where your risks are and protect your most critical data and systems and people.
That's very helpful. I think what I'd like to do now is start again, Annalise, with you, and ask you one more question. And I'm seeing some questions come through the chat, so we'll just want to turn to that next. And many people maybe have joined today to help understand some of the really low cost things that can be done. So because some of these actions may be expensive and complicated. So are there solutions or organizations that some of the agencies can better understand the problem and provide some tools And especially for those that may not have kind of a full-blown security staff. What should agencies be thinking about?
So that's a great question. And just like other people, the state doesn't have a ton of money. So the things that I'm going to share, these are things that we're actually taking advantage of as well. There's some really great things out there. There's what we call CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and it's part of the Department of Homeland Security. They provide a lot of services and they're free. There's no charge. So they'll come in, they'll do hygiene vulnerability scanning. The state's taking advantage of that ourselves. They can do some phishing campaign assessments. They can help you with some remote penetration testing. They can do risk assessments. They can help you stand up and run a tabletop exercise. And I know we used the term earlier, and just in case somebody here isn't a security geek like the rest of us, what that really means is you have developed a plan, an incident response plan for, in the worst case scenario, if bad things happen, what are you going to do? And then you test it out. And it's so very important, and it's always a success. I don't care if your tabletop fails in the first 5 minutes, and I've been that one where it did. In the first 5 minutes we failed, but we learned, right? So CISA can do a lot of this stuff for free. They can help you with incident response. I have a whole list that I'll be sharing that can be shared out with the group, as well as the contact on how to reach out to them and contact them. Also, there is the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. I had to look it up to make sure I said it right, because I've just called it MS-ISAC for years. And MS-ISAC membership is open to all U.S. state, local, tribal, government entities, K through 12 schools. I'll be providing the link. You can go out and look at their membership. They provide some free services. They provide something that we are using ourselves. They're calling it malicious domain blocking and reporting, also known as DNS filtering. This is huge. If you can get a membership with MS-ISAC, you want to sign up for that. That is free. And what that means is when someone like me is going too fast and I get a phishing email and I don't recognize it quickly enough and I click the link is being sent to a third-party site that checks it. And there's certain triggers. If it's a brand new website, they block it. If it's a known bad website, the intent is to help stop successful exploitation of phishing, right? They have other services that you do have to pay for, but it provide a lot of support. And then the third thing I would mention is if you're a city, county, state entity, you should look into what we call OGITM, the Oregon Association of Information Technology Management. It's ogitm.org. Your organization, your city, your county, your state agency can get a membership. It's fairly inexpensive. They have 2 conferences a year. Right now they're virtual. But what this really does is it puts you in contact with all of your peers in the state agencies, in the counties, in the cities. So if you have a question, hey, is anybody doing this? Does anybody have an idea? I'm in trouble. I need help, right? And I'm going to put in a plug for ourselves as well, right? Cybersecurity services, we provide security for the executive branch of the state. We'll also, if at all possible, help any city, county, state agency that has an issue. So if somebody has a problem and needs help, you can reach out to us. We are currently trying to build a state, I'm gonna put a little plug in for us. We're trying to put together a statewide cyber disruption plan. We received an award from the National Governors Association to help us do this. We have cities, we have counties, we have state agencies involved. If other people want to be involved, I will provide the information as well so that can be shared out. But there's a lot of fairly inexpensive resources out there. There isn't everything, but there's an awful lot, and a lot of it's really good stuff that you can really get huge value from.
Thank you, Annalise. So I'm going to turn to Wu-Chang and see if you have a response to some.
So I want to second the DNS filtering. I use it at home. I have a teenager at home and I have to filter YouTube and Netflix during the day so that she doesn't spend the entire time on it. But yeah, that's a quick and easy way to try and filter. You could whitelist the ones that you really want to access and then everything else you deny. That could be one way to make sure you're not, the people in your organization aren't going out and visiting some malicious sites. And they're pretty good now. I think the crowdsourced sort of curation of DNS names it's pretty reasonable. In terms of what we're trying to do, one of the things that we offer is a phishing, password, two-factor authentication curriculum. So we do offer this to high schools. We go out there and we basically give out a bunch of YubiKeys, which are these hardware security tokens. We teach them about the perils of passwords and how they can be compromised, how adversaries might get their credentials. And so this URL right here, this bit.ly/pdx-ub, that's our curriculum. And we allow, so what we'll do is we'll train the students and we'll train the teachers. So Cyber PDX this past summer, we'll try and train the teachers on this curriculum, show people examples of what phishing is about, take them to some of the quizzes that Annalise has talked about, where you're trying to identify people who will more likely click on that thing than anyone else. And then you're like, okay, you need to do a little bit more training. We give them examples of business email compromise training and what can happen. So we give them the example where Southern Oregon University lost or wired $1.7 million to the wrong person because the adversary got in there. And so we do case studies so that students can see exactly what these things look like. So we'll show them the John Podesta email that got him phished in the 2016 election. And then we'll talk about remediation. So password, and we'll train them in the remediation. So password managers, password checkups. We talk about multi-factor authentication, and then we give them a YubiKey, which is a tangible thing for them to really secure themselves. Really hard to break a YubiKey. And so our idea is that you have to teach this next generation. It's critical that the next generation gets away from these username passwords that have been really the Achilles heel to a lot of the stuff that we do in computing. On the enterprise end, one of the things that a lot of people have some people have talked about is identifying very attacked people in your organization. So for example, HR departments, they're always being attacked because maybe the folks aren't savvy enough and they're sitting there clicking on untrusted PDFs and doc files all the time. And so as an organization, figuring out who those people are and giving them that training and giving them, segmenting them off into their own network to make sure that they're their own sandbox, that's something that I think is a low-ish cost thing that people can do. A little bit higher cost would be maybe doing things like moving to Chromebooks, where the endpoint is sort of a dumb endpoint, so that if it gets ransomware or compromised, you're not completely wiping things out. The Chromebooks were like the toilet paper for the tech world when COVID hit, because everybody was like, oh, we got to ship Chromebooks back to all of our employees working remotely. But then there was a huge shortage. The other thing that people started doing is taking these hardware tokens, these YubiKeys, asking Ubico to pre-configure them for their employees on their account, and then just mailing it to their employees, because there wasn't the ability to do a physical onboarding of that thing. So those are things that I've seen people do and I've heard about.
So quick question, Wu-Chang, what is a YubiKey? And I'm assuming most know what two-factor is, but you might want to cover it.
It's oh gosh, this background is messing me up. Oh, here, I'll put it against my shirt. There's the YubiKey. This is a USB-A YubiKey. It's a way of, so what happens is my account, when I bootstrap this key gets associated with my Portland State email, for example. And it's a separate factor where in order for me to authenticate, I have to actually stick this into a laptop and touch it. And this really shuts down phishing, credential account hijacking is what I should say. And this is something that we offer for high schools. Like if they want us to run, and we can do this virtually, happy to go through this curriculum with people if we want to organize it. We basically ship them a classroom full of YubiKeys. And then we offer the training. And then we've done some studies after the fact, like 6 months later. Are they more aware? Are they still using multi-factor authentication? Have they been compromised? Are they more interested in following a security sort of discipline? Or are they interested in pursuing security? Because now they feel good about now knowing how to secure themselves better than any of their parents or their classmates. So that's the idea of offering this to high schools, is to really target the people, sort of giving up on our generation and saying, okay, let's fix this incoming generation to make sure that they're not going to repeat the same mistakes that we have.
Great, thank you. Hunter.
So I think I'll take Annalise's answer and I'll adapt it to my experience, right? So I spent my career before Palo Alto Networks in higher ed, and a lot of the things that she was talking about absolutely apply there. I was going to talk about DHS scans because that's something that is common. Apologize for the noise. That's something that we used quite a bit at both LSU and Tulane when I was there, and that was really a great way to sort of understand where the baseline was. What are the things that we're normally dealing with, and then how do we, again, back to this prioritization idea. What are the things that are important to us, and then protect those things. So working with DHS and getting some of those free services is absolutely amazing and a great use of our taxpayer money. The other thing I would mention is REN-ISAC, which is the Research and Education Network Information Sharing Center. They're very much like MS-ISAC, except they're focused on research and education networks. They do much of the same work, and they provide many of the same services. It's funny, Wu-Chang mentioned it, so I'll go ahead and admit it. I was using a system called Pi-hole this morning, which is a DNS blacklisting service, or a DNS resolver service, and it runs on a Raspberry Pi, and that's how I protect my network. That's one of the ways I protect my network. I of course use Palo Alto Networks technology, as we all do, but Pi-hole is a great, simple way to protect your home network. There are many versions of DNS whitelisting and blacklisting services available. Of course, you can use commercial services with those as well. REN-ISAC provides a nice DNS block list that can be plugged into any number of other systems, as well as the MS-ISAC and others. So those are sort of shoe leather ways of getting it done, but they are free and they are very effective. So the last thing I would mention, and I apologize for this, I blame my children. The last thing I would mention is, what are those consortia that support your organization? I spend a lot of time thinking about Internet2 and EDUCAUSE because they support education, but there's all kinds of state, federal, and NGO consortia that you should look into that can support whatever your organization is, whether it's Public Works or some other state and local organization. There's always going to be some consortia at the regional or national level that you can tap into. And so, I would say look into those as well.
Ron, what are you thinking?
I think I'll carry on with the ISAC conversation to begin with. So I agree 100% with the ISACs. They are great information sharing and analysis centers. There's a multi-state, which is focused on government and tribes. There is the REN education, but also keep in mind that for the different sectors, there's ISACs for them also: finance, retail, energy. So if your business, whether it's government or private, is focused in those areas, there's an ISAC for you in all likelihood. Search them out, a great resource. Another similar, and I'm talking here briefly about some collaborative resources before I talk about a couple specific ones. Another good collaborative one is Infragard. It is it's run by the FBI, stood up by the FBI, and it's regional information sharing. So in the case of the ransomware attacks recently, in the case of SolarWinds and stuff like that, that's a great opportunity to get plugged in and to stay up to date with the latest information. So Infragard, INFRA, guard, one word. Another one briefly is SANS, S-A-N-S. and they have great training, not cheap, but great quality training. But they also have a lot of fantastic free resources, the Internet Storm Center and other things. I would just highly encourage you just to go to the SANS website and just explore not just their training resources, but a lot of the other things they have. They're just super quality, supporting the whole community. A few things really quick specific to our conversation. I said earlier on, risk assessments are huge. And so I know that for a lot of folks, how do I do a risk assessment? Why am I doing a risk assessment? I want to do one tomorrow, but I can't get the money fast enough. All the reasons, I've been there. When I arrived to St. Charles, it was in the middle of the year. And so there wasn't the budget, there wasn't the time for a risk assessment. So the first thing I did, after reaching out to peer groups, folks who I trusted in the area, was to pull out Verizon's Data Breach Investigations Report, DBIR. I really like that. There are several similar resources, but I really like the Verizon DBIR because it is open source, and that organizations volunteer to contribute their breach information to Verizon to collect, analyze, and report this information. The second thing I really like about it is it's broken down by sector. So I could go into this and I could look at the healthcare sector and find out what are the greatest risks to the healthcare sector from the past year, as reported by the healthcare sector, but also layered on top of the national picture also. So if you want a tactical, down and dirty, poor man's risk assessment, I would say go to the DBIR or similar resources, and that'll just give you a good sense of where should I be looking, what's important versus what's urgent. As far as a more formal approach, when I was saying that you really need a roadmap, what I needed is a roadmap. And I can tell you 100% because I need to build, focus my efforts, but also I need to communicate what am I trying to achieve and how am I going to measure what I have achieved and demonstrate what I've achieved. And so the way I've done that is through the Center for Internet Security, CIS. And they have what's called the Critical Security Controls, CSC. Now, if you've been around for a little while, you may know them as the SANS Top 20 because SANS had them originally before CIS took over, Center for Internet Security. And so you may hear them as the top 20 controls, critical security controls, but either way, go ahead and Google any of those and you'll hit CIS and those controls. Now, why I really like them is because most of the organizations that I've worked for, we have been Nist based as our foundational framework, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. Normally, from a compliance standpoint, and increasingly from a risk standpoint, your organization is either going to be ISO or NIST based. And I would argue that most US national, not international, but US national organizations, government especially, should probably be NIST based because most of our compliance, most of our incident response is going to be federally focused. And that's what the federal government uses is NIST also. So we have used, what we've landed on is the NIST cybersecurity framework. That is our umbrella, overarching, risk-based framework that we use to drive our information security, cybersecurity, maturity in the organization, and how I communicate that to the board, to leadership, and to other folks. So if you have the CSF, the cybersecurity framework, the next level down would be NIST 853. That is basically the framework of security controls. It's hundreds and hundreds of controls. And even though, maybe 10, 15 years ago, you would walk in and they would say, "Thunk, here's 853, go ahead and implement this." And you're like, I don't know where to begin, where to end. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. You feel like you're drowning. And so quickly the realization came that you need a roadmap to implement 853 to protect your organization. And so that's where the Center for Internet Security's critical security controls come in. Those are 20 controls that have been identified by a private-public collaboration led by CIS, and it's NIST-based. And it is directly related to 853, to the cybersecurity framework. And these 20 controls are broken out into 3 groups of, you would do probably group 1, which is 1 through 6, and then you would implement from there. But depending on your organization, you may hop around depending on the nature of your business and the risk that you have. Another thing that's really good about it is there's implementation groups. Okay, so there's implementation group 1, 2, and 3. This was a later, actually it's a fairly recent implementation of the critical security controls, where they said that if you're a small organization, kind of like a mom and pop, if you don't have much confidential information, your implementation group 1, you only need to do a small bit necessarily of the total controls. If you're implementation group 2, you're probably a regional, you may be a health system, you may be retail, whatever else, you may be government, but you don't have a lot of confidential information if you're government, whatever the case may be. But then you'd be implementation group 2, and then group 3 would be multinational, highly confidential information, whatever else. But the point is, they've mapped out the way ahead for you to implement these controls. You implement them in this way, you'll be doing it the way that organizations, peers next to you. So when you reach out and you talk to people, they're like, yep, I get it. I'm talking the same language. Here's how I can help you. If you reach out to a third-party vendor, they're like, yep, I get it. Here's what you're doing. And as you progress through it, you can map it over to your compliance requirements, as we all have, whether it be CGIS, IRS, CMS, you name it. And so it is very mappable from that standpoint also. So my recommendation would be, if you're trying to do a down and dirty risk assessment, the Verizon DBIR, something on those lines, and then your initial way ahead, if nothing else, would be the CIS top 20 critical security controls.
That's great, Ron. Thank you. It's very practical kind of advice. So one of the things that is coming through in the chat, and we've had a couple questions about, and any panelists can answer who feels comfortable answering the question, but this is really about the cloud. And so one of the questions here is, with the adoption of SaaS, we're seeing it becomes difficult to catalog services used and the type of data that may be stored in these services. What tools do you recommend to track onboarded cloud solutions? And I'm going to add another piece, because there's another question about the cloud, and that's really about how to balance security and productivity in that environment. So Wu-Chang, I know this is something that you think a lot about, so maybe we'll just start with Wu-Chang and then have others jump in.
So the way we're doing securing infrastructure is about to change rapidly. When people move to the cloud, and people are moving to the cloud, the last 8-9 months of COVID, the cloud providers are seeing a huge uptake. The problem with the cloud is it's got a different security model. And it's got poor visibility, like you can't get onto the machine that's running your stuff. People talk about SaaS. Well, you don't even know there's a machine underneath there. And so there's a lot of new stuff to teach people. And unfortunately, we don't have time to teach people it before they actually start deploying. And that's unfortunately the state of it. In terms of that specific question, this is something that we're developing here at Portland State, is we're trying to show students how to do, for example, an audit in the cloud. And so if you're gonna go to these, so the question was microservices and containers and using SaaS along with your microservices. And these are ways of encapsulating something and hiding it away so you don't have to worry about it anymore. But when you do that, if someone breaks into that stuff, you also don't see it either. And so most cloud providers are working on logging and auditing. And then because there's so much infrastructure being deployed in the cloud, I mean, you're talking about hundreds of gigabytes of log data. And now you need to analyze all that stuff for potential compromise. Whereas in traditional security, maybe you had one machine and you would check the logs on that one machine and you'd be like, oh, something happened. But now you have hundreds of services that your app relies upon. You have dozens of machines that get spun up and down. Like, how do you do security visibility into that? And this is where a lot of companies are there. This is a huge vacuum. A lot of companies are helping cloud projects not only do the analysis, but also making sure that they're reducing privileges appropriately. And so that's something that and I don't want to go through the details of that, but that's something that we try and teach our students, is how is that kind of stuff going to be done? Because it's going to be done within the next 5 years somehow. Hopefully it's done well. Hopefully it's done better than what we're doing, what we did before in the enterprise, which didn't work out so well.
So I'd like to add a little bit to that. you know, without talking about our own products that do these things, because that's not a cheap solution necessarily. You know, I have a whole talk track that I put together over the last several months, and Wu-Chang has really hit on it. It's just, you know, this immediate need of remote access, secure remote access, a move to the cloud, and then you know, all of the things that come from those two events. And so when you think about the cloud, you have to really think about what is, you know, how are you utilizing the DevOps cycle, and how are you inserting security into that? Because without just visibility into your network like you traditionally have, you have to insert security in a few different ways. One is you know, in getting your developers up to speed on secure practices, secure coding practices, and then auditing that code. That's something that IT security operations shops have not traditionally done. So it's a sort of a stretch for the security operation to understand how security is done at sort of the kernel layer, not at the network layer. So that's one thing to think about, is really getting in the middle of the DevOps cycle. The other thing to think about is to you know, if you have a firewall, whether it's ours or somebody else's, really defining those services that you will allow through the firewall. Because in universities, you see this all the time, where they're using AWS as the preferred cloud provider, but researchers are over using GCP because they like the interface for whatever reason. So you have to, and this goes back to, you know, what I was saying earlier about partnering with risk management, if you have that, or partnering with other departments within your organization, and starting a dialogue on what services are you using. Because if you don't have the technical tools to do these things, you have to start relying on the other users of the network to open your eyes to some of the things that are going on. You know, in my experience, if you put security out there as an enabler of work instead of, you know, some roadblock that you have to get around, you'll find that your constituencies are a lot more willing to tell you what they're doing, because they don't see you as a threat in that way. And again, I apologize for this beeping.
So I'll just add in a little bit there. Great responses. I heard there's this, I guess, impression that the cloud is some magical cure-all. If we just park it in the cloud, we can forget about it, which we all know at some level isn't true. I heard somebody say the other day, it was kind of funny, that the cloud is nothing more than somebody else's computer, is one way to think about it. As far as what tools do we use, really, CASBs, the Cloud Asset Security Brokers. If you're Microsoft, the MCAS is a great way to be able to identify and to track that data that's coming and going from the cloud. A couple of points I would bring up just from my experiences, just around SaaS and cloud in general, is you have your organizational sponsored cloud, but keep in mind also there's third-party clouds, the ones that your lines of business can take a credit card and sign up for. We're talking about Google Docs, iCloud, Dropbox, SurveyMonkey, all those areas where your information can be stored in somebody else's cloud, somebody else's location. Keep that in mind. A second thing is access to the cloud. So again, it's seen as a great disaster recovery cure-all, but you think about, how am I going to access the cloud when there's a disaster, or when my systems are all down, when I'm locked down? So keep that in mind. And a third thing really quick is back to the Center for Internet Security, CIS. They have hardened virtual machine images, which you can get from them. And essentially you can use those for your cloud. And that's a very quick way to get pre-configured secure images for different OSs or environments that you can use in the various flavors of cloud. Thank you.
If I could just tag along on that. So this sort of brings the earlier discussion in and wraps it up, because we talked about frameworks and sort of risk assessment. So if you identify the places where you're most vulnerable, and you say, I'm going to focus on that, then you would map that to the control that you would try and implement to knock, that Ron mentioned, that you would just target and then do that really well, and then that forces your adversary to do some work to go some other route to get you. So that's where these frameworks and these controls have really allowed people to reason about what to do next, much better than before, where it was just like, oh my gosh, there's too much stuff here. What do I focus on? What do I spend my money on? And so that it's just a nice way of looking at the problem and being able to start somewhere with it.
So for the non-technical kind of folks in the room, what I think I'm hearing is we put locks on our doors to make it more difficult for burglars to get into the house. And is that some of the controls, kind of the idea around controls is to just make put barriers in place? Correct me if I'm wrong here.
They're smarter locks, but they're still locks, yes. The idea is it ultimately, I think, is an easier to operate lock, right? A lock that you can open in certain in different kinds of circumstances and for different kinds of access, right? But yes, it's very much a lock.
It's the goal of vulnerability management. And also you want to make your organization harder to access than the organization next door. It's kind of the story about, I don't need to run faster than the bear, I just need to run faster than my partner kind of deal. Yeah.
So there's an anecdote. So penetration testers are hired to break into systems. And so like you can, one interview that I heard was like, yeah, it's great until we come across an organization that does two-factor authentication. And then we're like, dang, that sucks. And that's when you know that you're making an impact, when the people who are paid to break into your enterprise are like, oh, dang, I'm really, this is gonna make my job a lot harder. The other one that makes the life of an adversary really hard are Canary Tokens. And these are things that you drop around your network, like for example, a Word document that should never be opened, like no legitimate user would ever open it. But of course, when an adversary breaks into your network, they're clicking on everything, man. They're trying to find everything, and it would call out, and then you would actually get some notification. So one of the best Canary tokens is the AWS access, secret access key and account ID. Like that is irresistible, right? Like that's like access to the entire project. But if as soon as they try and use it, you know that they're there. So that's the kind of stuff, that's a really cheap solution. In fact, the Canary tools, in fact, I think there's open source versions of this too. So it could be free. I mean, it's not turnkey, I'd say right now, but like those are things that if you are trying to be the attacker and you come across and it really like makes you upset, those are the things that the defenders need to put into place.
That's really, really helpful. And so I want to turn now, we have roughly 25 minutes or so left, but I want to turn now to some of the more kind of softer ends of things, I guess, more the collaborative end. We have a question about sort of work between organizations. So the question is, to what degree is each organization on its own in protecting themselves kind of helpful versus somehow helping each other to cooperate in some way that would create greater security? So it's really a question really about how should organizations be thinking about working together for security, and maybe what are the benefits to doing so? Ron, I see you unmuted. Do you want to start maybe?
Sure. So I've learned that lesson. And so I think definitely it's a collaborative thing. And I don't want in any way my earlier comments about being harder to access than my peers, so that we go to them. I didn't mean that in the way that I don't care about anybody. More and more, we have to be collaborative, I think, within our sectors, especially government. I mean, my gosh, there's no better area for collaboration there. I think a great example of that is the SolarWinds breach that just happened, where FireEye came out, and they came out transparently. And because they came out so transparently, so quickly, the nation, actually the world, has benefited from their willingness to basically say, look, we were had, and here's everything behind it. And then, so I think that's a great example of that. But I think that as far as disaster recovery, as far as incident response, working with peer organizations, regionally especially, you can definitely support each other. If you start to exercise together, you can work together. You don't necessarily need to share the crown jewels with each other, but there is a certain level of collaboration you can do that I think is paramount today and more so going forward. I think it's a great concept.
Yeah. To add to that, I would, I did a project several years ago when I was at Tulane, where we took, it was actually FireEye was one of the vendors, and we took FireEye's threat intelligence and fed it to another system, and then shared that with several other universities. And it was very ahead of its time, because by the time we had finished the project and I'd done a presentation on it, the entire world had caught up. So I think all you have to do is look out to the way security is running, on the international level these days. And FireEye's response to their own breach is exactly the way you would expect someone to respond to these things, by telling you exactly what happened and giving you all the tools necessary to protect yourself from the tools that they themselves developed. So the point of all of that is that security companies, ours and every other company, is looking at how we share intelligence. And these are things that not even 5 years ago we thought was the secret sauce that made us the important security company versus some other security company. But what we found is that we can't solve all those problems, and all of our competitors can't solve those problems. So we share that data amongst ourselves. So when I was on the other side of the table, the first thing I would do in a new department or a new organization is start identifying all those areas where I can build collaboration and really work with the owners of those spaces, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to do this. If you're sitting in the center of your security universe and looking out, trying to discern everything around you, you'll never be able to respond to it all. You'll never be able to be secure. So the way forward on all fronts related to security is collaboration. So there's just no other way around it at this point. The adversary has too many automated tools. They have too much stuff they can just go out and buy on the dark web and start hitting you with. You have to look around your peers and ask for help. That's the absolute number one thing you can do to improve your own security.
Great, Wu-Chang.
So this reminds me of a feature podcast. I'm an avid listener of Risky.biz, which is a security podcast. So it's one of the most entertaining security news podcasts. They're hilarious, but they talked, the Hewlett Foundation sponsored a bunch of these featured podcasts that are mostly for the public good. And they did one on critical infrastructure security and how are we going to, as a society, deal with this. And one of the proposals from that was the idea of these neighborhood communities where maybe government would fund the utility company, the larger utility company, to be a neighborhood keeper for the local co-ops and the municipalities, to try and do some training, to try and build a security community that's in a smaller scope, because typically I don't think we operate well when we got too many people all together, but just smaller sort of local communities where that kind of knowledge, because you get the economies of scale at the bigger utility to actually invest in a security team, but the local co-op, they don't have that. But then you would need some training mechanism. And I don't think this is actually, I don't know if this is something that is just a proposal, but that would be an idea that I particularly like, that idea in terms of operationalizing the spread of security knowledge, which is what I think needs to happen.
So it sounds like collaboration can come in a bunch of different forms. So one would be kind of the training piece. One is strategies, and then another is maybe data sharing. Did I miss anything in terms of other ways to collaborate?
I think data sharing and also maybe a mentoring kind of gets back to what Hunter was getting at also. Seek a hunter and also reach out to be a hunter. Seek a mentor and reach out to be a mentor also.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I love Wu-Chang, what you were saying about local communities. It's not to be technical about this, but one of the things that we've been talking about in security the last dozen years is building a smaller and smaller perimeter. This idea of micro-segmenting your network so that only under certain circumstances you can get to certain things. But that's a great analog for what you were saying about local security at a co-op level versus the energy delivery company. So I think that's a really great idea, and one that we'll probably see more of.
Yeah, you don't want to boil. So someone mentioned boiling the ocean. I think a lot of us, oh, let's do this across everybody, but that's boiling the ocean. It has to be a local thing. Yeah, bottom up.
So in many ways, kind of scaling down some of the solutions. So we do have a question here, and I think this is really more directed towards Annalise. And Annalise lost connection for a little bit. So welcome back. And really, I think this is for everyone who may be able to answer this question too. But there's folks that are especially interested in the state initiative with cities and counties. And I think let's broaden that question out a little bit to say for smaller cities and counties and organizations that really need some assistance, are there things here that we haven't spoken about that you can think of that would be helpful to share? So Annalise, we'll start with you if that's okay.
Sure. Sorry I disappeared. It was a little frustrating, but hey, this is IT, right? Wow, something that we haven't already shared. I think honestly, the biggest thing I can think of is just to reach out to others. If you need help, even if you don't think that person, that organization is able to help you, reach out to them. You'd be surprised how much assistance you can get when you're having a problem from other organizations, whether it could be your vendor, it could be reaching out to us at the state, it could be reaching out to another city, another county. I know that a lot of organizations are very concerned. They don't want to reach out and they don't want to share what problems they're having because they don't want it to become public knowledge. My experience, and I've had the unlucky experience to have gone through a rather large breach, people don't share your information. I know that if you come to us and ask us for help and we help and somebody asks us about your situation, our response is always going to be whether we've helped you or not. It's not our story to tell, and we won't speak to it. It's just not something we're going to do. And that's what I found in my unfortunate experience was we had vendors, I had other organizations reaching out and helping, and I didn't have anybody going out there and then telling everybody things that we didn't want made public knowledge, right? So really rely on your peers, and if you are having a problem, ask your vendors. You'd be surprised how much help they can give you in the appropriate situation. Doesn't mean every single time they can, but when they can, they will.
It's great. Does anybody else have any other thoughts about help for?
I would just add one little detail to that, and that's why it's important to build these relationships ahead of time. That way you know who to call, when these things go down, and they're ready to help you. When I was, several instances, I would get calls from folks I hadn't heard from in years, and asking for help. And, of course I was willing to help them, but it took a long time to sort of understand what the problem was and how we could help them and all that sort of stuff. So if you're building these relationships and maintaining them over time, they have an understanding of what your needs are, and you have an understanding of what theirs are, so that when it's time to make the call, they know exactly how to help you, and they know who they can reach out to as well. So that's the only thing I would add to that is that those relationships really become truly important at that point.
And I'm hearing, because one of our first webinars with some folks really was about a case that happened in Tillamook County. And so it sounds like other counties and cities that have had experience here may be helpful to reach out to. Would you agree with that? Okay.
Absolutely. In fact, there was another county recently that had some issues, and they said they reached out to, I think they reached out directly to Tillamook. And again, you know, we're all in this together, and we don't want to see somebody else, whether it's private or public entity, struggling. And so whatever we can do to help within our power, we're going to do. We're going to help. We're going to offer. You know, one of the things that we do, we hear of a city or a county having a problem. As soon as we know about it, we reach out to the channels that we have just to say, hey, is there something that we can do? Sometimes we can't, sometimes we can. Depending on the organizations, you know, depending on whether or not they have cyber insurance and what their requirements are around that and what their legal things are. Sometimes they allow us to help them, and sometimes they're not able to. You know, it's part of why we really want this cyber disruption plan. We want everybody to know who else is out there. You know, who all can you ask for help? Can you ask MS-ISAC? What about the fusion centers? What about the National Guard? You know, what are all the different entities that could get it engaged, and how do we get them engaged? My personal, I won't say my big fear is that we'll have a massive problem across cities, across counties in the state of Oregon. And if multiple entities are hit at once, how do we coordinate this and have a concerted response and a quick response to be able to help? Hence the cyber disruption plan that we're trying to build, and not in a vacuum by ourselves, right? This isn't something that the state is saying, we're going to tell you what to do. We're just trying to help facilitate the building of the plan.
And Annalise, for everyone's benefit listening here today, are there ways that you would suggest that people get involved in the cyber disruption plan, or will we hear, how will we hear more about it?
Absolutely. If you want to get involved, one of the things I will provide to you guys to share will be the email address of the person at CSS that's helped facilitating this for us. If you want to hear more about it, absolutely, you can reach out to her. Otherwise, I would strongly encourage you to join OGET'em. We talk about it, OGET'em. They're probably sick of us talking about it. It's not going to stop us. We're going to keep talking about it. You know, Cinnamon, who's the person whose email address I'll give you, is probably the best first contact. She is building a distribution list that we can add you to. So you don't necessarily have to say, oh, I want to be involved and I'll come to meetings. They're all virtual, but you know, you may want to know what's going on. You may not have the ability to give that much time forward, but we can get you on a distribution list where you can at least hear what's going on and be aware. So absolutely reach out to Cinnamon. We'll give you her email address.
Great. And so for all participants, just in case you didn't hear this piece, is that we will follow up this webinar with additional resources that we collect from panelists. So we have another question here, and it's really more, it's also cloud-based, but I want to expand it and broaden it out to some of the self-service tools. So some of the cloud providers promote some self-service tools. What's your response to that? And how should agencies be reviewing these tools in a sustainable way? So busy agency with a lot coming down. How should they be thinking about these tools? And then an additional or related question being, what's the right level of governance? So when we're thinking about these issues, how should we sort of think about the role of CEO versus some line staff, et cetera? How should we be thinking about governing? Whoever unmutes, right. There we go, Ron.
I guess I'll jump in first. Governance is kind of a four-letter word for organizations. You're looking at operational governance, obviously, regarding the deployment of the cloud. But I would say, from my perspective, especially from an information security standpoint, data governance is huge when it comes to the cloud. Because where you might have had some semblance of control when you're on-prem, when you go to the cloud, it's really, in many ways, decentralizing your control over the data and over much of the actions of your employees also. And so having that strong governance before you go to the cloud is ideal, but I also know that's very aspirational. Usually, well, data governance is a catch-up game almost with every organization, but I can't stress enough the importance of that, because again, the lack of direct control you have over the data and over the staff, for an example being, the staff can turn around with many of these cloud tools and invite third parties, external folks into meetings, if you will, that is essentially within your organization's parameters, your cloud parameters perhaps, but it's in the middle of your data. And so how are you able to control the data loss protection, the access, do the right people have access to it? Those are just some examples of the data governance. So yes, governance is huge. Governance is oh so hard. Governance is, like many things like data inventory, data classification, and other things, is usually one of the last things to be done if it's done at all. But I can't stress how important it is, and just how the cloud is really bringing that to bear even more.
It's a hard question. I'll attempt an answer. So I think, you know, if I'm wearing my Palo Alto hat, I say, you know, go spend money, but it's an expensive problem to solve. What I have often seen, particularly local government do, is partner up with several organizations and sort of pool their resources. Because if they can pool their resources, then they can buy the cloud computing they need, and then really think hard about what are the security tools they would like to implement as part of that. Whether it's something like, I sit on the board of an organization called Red Cloud. It's the Research and Higher Ed Cloud Foundation. And they've got some open source security risk detectors built in there, and some oversight capabilities for AWS, and now they're building it into GCP and Azure. So that's an open source solution. But, you know, as my old boss say, you build or buy, but you still have to spend the money. With an open source solution, you still have to have someone to actually, you know, maintain the solution for you. So I think pooling resources is really an area that you should explore if you can, because there's more that you can do when you have more folks looking at that infrastructure for their various projects. And you know, the other thing you can do to really get a handle on it without being very heavy-handed about it is to pull the logs off the cloud service and run them through whatever your SIM tool is, your log management tool, and actually build some alerting around that. It won't stop the bad news from happening, but it will alert you when it does. It's kind of, it's somewhat like the Canary example that Wu-Chang was talking about a little while ago. So that would be my thoughts around that, is really pooling resources and looking at things like Red Cloud if it makes sense for your organization, and then building log alerts, which nobody wants to hear, but it's one of the ways that you can do this, you know, somewhat effectively.
And I'll add also, I'm sorry, Wu-Chang, go ahead.
Why don't you follow up?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I guess I'll start with an anecdote. I won't name the company, but this is their crown jewels. And the AWS project was created by a developer, and a set of developers who they care about expediency and deploying code. So no security on this thing. And it was a ongoing battle that never finished to get security placed into that project. So this is really critical when we talk about DevOps, that I think, Hunter, you brought that up, and we talk about governance. The thing with DevOps is that if you have an idea and you want to develop it, you're typically just on your own creating that account and then getting all that stuff in there. And then the organization is like trying to, after the fact, bolt in their compliance and their whatever they need to lock that thing down after. And this is a huge political fight, because no developer wants to be, no developer wants their God mode taken away from them. So then you have this. So what our approach at Portland State is, we got to teach the developers that are creating the freaking account to do security first, to get them to understand security and the importance of making sure they're not giving owner permissions on a particular service account, because that's going to come back and get you. And so one of the things is we motivate this by showing them how to break into insecure cloud projects, and then showing them exactly how you would configure a project with least privileges. And you have to do that up front. You can't do that after the fact. Like in our program, as we're teaching them how to develop, we got to teach them how to secure the project, because inevitably they're going to be the ones, or they're often the ones to start the new project. And if you make a mistake at the beginning, it's going to be difficult to take that stuff away, because it's so complex to do security in the cloud that people aren't, if it's working, they don't want to touch it. And this is where they say cloud security is immutable, because once it's deployed, nobody wants to touch that thing because they don't want to break it. So we've got a real problem here as we move to the cloud, and that's one of the things that we're interested in trying to teach here at Portland State, just to not add to the problem any more than it's already there.
Super, thank you. So I do have one wrap-up question before we close. Time goes so very quickly. And we'll go in order again: Annalise, Wu-Chang, Hunter, Ron. And that question is, if you could identify the one simple sort of next step. So as the audience gets off this webinar today, what would you say the very next step that they should do? And some of this may be something that you already addressed today, but what one next step would you recommend our audience take? Annalise.
I'm gonna fail because I'm not gonna just say one thing. I've never been good at following direction. Reach out to all the free resources, join those groups, consider OGET'em if you're a state, local government. And if you can't do anything else, at least start some sort of security awareness training program. But and there's a lot of stuff that's out there that's available for free that you can take advantage of. But yeah, if you really don't know what to do, get a hold of CISA and have them come out and help you do a risk assessment. They'll help you. That'll help you start figuring out where your vulnerabilities are and how to prioritize them. And I'll shut up now because I'm saying way more than one.
Thank you. Wu-Chang.
I would say go to that link, learn the curriculum, and then teach it to someone else would be what I would have you do. And it's written in a way, we're talking about non-technical high school teachers we're teaching this curriculum to, so that they can offer part of it to their students, like offer it to your kids. So I talk to my daughter at least about multi-factor authentication and good passwords. That security hygiene is what we need everybody to start with. So that would be my suggestion. That's why I put it there, because I kind of knew the question was going to be asked. I cheated.
So we will follow up. It's hard to see the link on your screen. So we'll follow up to make sure that with our audience that they have the link. Okay, Hunter.
I'm gonna change it just a little bit to make it more personal, because I really wanted to get this. I really wanted to find an opportunity to get this in. I would say two things. One, turn on two-step or multi-factor authentication on all of your personal services, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or any of these other things, because I know nobody on this webinar is sharing passwords between services, because we're all good citizens there in that way. But I would say that's a personal first step. That's an easy one. Most services nowadays will support some form of multi-factor. They'll call it two-step, which is technically a little different, but still provides much the same protection. And the other thing I would say, and this one is, I'm very religious on this one, is a password manager. Use a password manager. I always say that you couldn't beat my Amazon password out of me, because I don't know it. I just don't know it. I know the password to my password manager, and my Amazon password is 20 characters of whatever. So those are the two things I would say to do personally, because if you can build that personal cyber hygiene and then sort of, to Wu-Chang's point, sort of preach the good word about cyber hygiene to those around you, then that will have an appreciable and meaningful effect. We've seen dozens and dozens of times over the years people's corporate or organizational accounts hacked, or not hacked, but compromised because of a password that was shared with some other service. So those are my 2 things.
Great, thank you. Ron?
I would say develop a plan of some kind, get some goals identified as soon as possible, because collaborating for the sake of collaborating, going to information sharing, whatever else, just for the sake of that is not going to be helpful if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, A, and B, internally, if you can't communicate to leadership, to the organization, to the board, if there is a board for in your case, it's going to be very hard for you to be successful at that point. Second thing I would say, I'm going to go with Annalise and go for 3. The second thing I would say is collaborate early, reach out early, reach out to the FBI, reach out to the local law enforcement, reach out to the state before the incident happens. So you can find out, so you get those relationships formed. And also if they need evidence, if they need information, you can figure out what do they need and what format, and you can get it before or as it's happening, instead of when it's happening, trying to figure out at that point what the game is. And the third thing I would say is this is a game of excellence, not perfection. It's, for most of us in this field, we tend to be perfectionists, and it took me a while personally to learn that it's excellence. And I think Annalise mentioned this earlier, is, sometimes you need to do good enough as you continue. You need to put that compensating control in place as you continue to work toward that perfection. 70% is normally, if you look back, 40% better than where you were before. So just keep that incremental change. Don't always go for the 90+% all the time.
And I don't know, panelists, if you saw in the Q&A some comments just thanking you for the really great information that you've provided here today. And it just kind of reinforces, I think, how collaboration and how working together really can make a difference. So I really want to thank you for your time. Very valuable. So the one last thing I think we want to do is announce that Portland State is working and offering a professional certificate in building cyber resilience. And this is really designed for managers, public administrators, IT professionals in areas of public service. So local governments, special districts, nonprofits, tribal governments, small hospitals, and educational institutions, really concerned about data security and risk management in the organizations. And it's designed for non-technical folks. So that was something that we wanted to announce, and that registration will open for that in January. So if you have any interest in joining something like that, we will provide that link in the follow-up information. So again, thank you very much. Just absolutely a pleasure this afternoon. And with that, we will be closing the webinar.